welcome to the Mission Report podcast. And today I'm blessed to have Brad Ortenzi and Dave Cox with Zoe International. We are still about once a month, we're hitting themes on the human trafficking efforts, the anti-human trafficking efforts going on here in Pennsylvania and around the country. And we're getting both a national and international perspective with some of the organizations like Zoe International, Shared Hope International. And we're partnering with these folks because there was a lot of focus on Thailand years ago as a tourist sex trafficking location. And Zoe was one of the first organizations to get involved over there. And as we became aware more and more of what is going on here in the United States, Zoe has expanded their operations and is now involved even here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I'd like to give you guys an opportunity to give a little bit of history about Zoe, how it got started and the efforts and the progress you made from Thailand to California and then jumping across the United States to Pennsylvania.
Sounds great.
David, if you want to go.
Okay, sure. I'll give a quick snapshot. So Zoe International has been in operation since 2002, and it was really launched with a twofold mission. We say it's reaching every person, and that's a missional aspect. Zoe International is a faith-based organization, Christian organization, and they bring the gospel, especially to unreached people groups, which is for Zoe, the first nation that they started with was Thailand, where about 1% of the people have had an opportunity to hear or respond to the gospel. And so they started their missions there. And at the same time, the other half of the mission is rescuing every child. So reaching every person, rescue every child. And that aspect of the mission deals with combating child trafficking, which is a worldwide problem. It's not a Thailand problem. It's not just a US problem. It is a worldwide problem. But when child trafficking came on the radar in 2002, it burned in the hearts of our founders. And they were willing to liquidate their business and invest in this mission, which is now, for Zoe, we're represented in 5 nations combating child trafficking. And in the US, we've got a footprint on the East Coast and the West Coast where we do prevention, rescue, and restoration. And we've just seen great results over all these years.
You want to touch a little bit about the safe house, for lack of a better word, that you have for the people who are victims that are becoming survivors.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have one in Thailand. We have one here in LA, but Brad, I'll let him speak to Thailand since he lived in Thailand for many years.
Yeah, thank you. So I had the privilege of working with Zoe International in Thailand for 5 years. My wife and I were missionaries there. That's how we got our start in Thailand. So our start with Zoe. Thailand has just a special place in our heart, just a beautiful country, beautiful people. But our operations in Thailand are pretty large. I believe we have well over 125 staff members in Thailand, and we have a restorative home long-term, and we also have a child rescue center in Thailand as well. So, and we have a transitional home as well. But our operations there look like our long-range home is healing belongs and operates most within the home and within a family type atmosphere. So we try and create a family type atmosphere there. And if possible, the victims of human trafficking, we want to return them to families, but sometimes there's no families to return them to. So we have a long-range process for them that is filled with everything therapeutic, vocational, transitional, everything start to finish. We also have a child rescue center where literally children come specifically from Thai social services and Thai police to our child rescue center. And that's just kind of like an assessment place and a place where they can be loved on unconditionally from as soon as they cross onto our campus. So that's what we have some crazy numbers over the years Generally, I believe our operations in Thailand, we're partnering with a lot of government agencies and a lot of other organizations there where we rescue anywhere, I believe, from the high teens to 30 children a year in Thailand. During the COVID era, that's where the numbers were astronomical. I believe we had about 70 to 80 children come into our home per year over the COVID time.
Wow. Now, both of you have law enforcement backgrounds, and then Brad, you went into social services before you got involved over in Thailand. One of the things is that I love about your organization is you're actually making that connection between law enforcement and the social services. I know, David, you're doing that out in California, and Brad, actually, why don't we touch on what you're doing here in Pennsylvania, in Berks and Lancaster counties?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really interesting situation with both Dave and I. We didn't plan it this way. It just sort of kind of happened. We were placed in a situation where we both have law enforcement background and law enforcement experience, and now we're in an organization that does a large part of restoration is a huge part of what we do. So I can speak here on the East Coast, and Dave's doing pretty much the same. He can speak to that as well. But here on the East Coast, we've designed the Berks and Lancaster task forces with Zoe being a coordinating organization within the task forces. And, like all good nonprofits, we find ways to fill gaps. And through a series of relationships and conversations, it found that Zoe could fill a gap here in Berks and Lancaster County, where we could be the coordinating organization. And my background in law enforcement really helps that, in that I can look at and work with law enforcement to see what they're doing on the stings and what they're doing with investigations, and then we can coordinate the restorative and the advocates and the mentorship right behind that. So it's just a really kind of almost like a one-stop shop in a way. And one thing I've learned through this process, which is really not a secret, is that law enforcement and social services, they don't always speak the same languages. So in some ways, I'm sort of the Rosetta Stone there of I can kind of mediate and just kind of shift some services and kind of be that buffer between law enforcement, because law enforcement has so much to do. I understand what they're doing, and I can see what they're doing, and without even them saying anything, I can already start the restorative process behind what they're doing. And Dave's doing pretty much the same thing in Los Angeles.
When you started with Berks first, or no, you started in
Lancaster County first, yeah.
Right, and can you tell us how Berks approached you, and the reason? I mean, it was a success that you were showing in Lancaster County that had Berks County approach you.
Yeah, so Berks County came to us through another nonprofit. That another nonprofit had already started, like sort of trying to they were gathering everyone together. But when Zoe became involved in this, again, it was over COVID is when this whole thing kind of started, and COVID had some challenges with it. But really, COVID gave myself a breathing time, because I just come home from Thailand, and I could do some research on what is working well within the Commonwealth, within human trafficking task forces, and what's not working well. And because of my experience of working on county task forces as a detective, I saw that there was a lot of power and influence with the district attorney's office. So we built this structure around the district attorney really leading the charge here. So I'm a volunteer with both counties per se, quasi, and I just go to the counties and say, how do you want to work this? What can we do to make that happen? Many counties, they don't have salary and budget to throw a whole lot into human trafficking work. So what Zoe does is we donate the time, our expertise, our experience, our staff to fill those positions, and to connect the victims and connect everybody together in that whole process, where it doesn't cost the county anything, and we found it to be a pretty successful model.
And one of the things that stuck with me in an earlier conversation was you had related how the law enforcement folks know to get a hold of you when they make a bust. If they pick up what would be typically called a prostitution event happening, they know to get a hold of you. And you want to kind of walk through that and how you deal with the person that's in the life.
Yeah. So we're very privileged and blessed to be a part of every sting that happens in Lancaster and Berks County. So we know about it ahead of time. We can plan for it ahead of time. You know, once we get the call, like, hey, we're going to be doing a sting, that just kind of rings the bell of a number of things that we start working on ahead of time, just preventatively of placement, detox, all those things that may come up in that sting. And to look through the lens of what a sting looks like, law enforcement has a ton of things that they're already doing and responsibilities. So they don't have time for any of this. So that's where our advocates come in and myself come in of everything is already set up ahead of time. Should we need some type of restorative services or placement? And then when we're on the strings, our advocates are interacting with every woman that we come in contact with. And the process starts right there. And should something happen after hours, I'm available after hours as well. And all those things are kind of set up. But then again, when we get that phone call, we can move into action with processes that are already set up.
Yeah, David, I know you had a lot of this already kind of set up. Zoe had out in California before David got involved in this here. But is it beyond, because you're operating in Los Angeles County, are you out into the Ventura and some of the other counties as well doing your work there?
Occasionally we will coordinate with Ventura or other counties that are close to us. We do have various law enforcement agencies reach out, especially if they're going to be doing certain types of stings, or they may come across a case and they want some direction for a potential victim.
Yeah. Now, the two of you, again, I'm former law enforcement too, but how did you guys break down the silos? You know, that whole Brad, you had mentioned that you're speaking a different language, but Zoe's done a remarkable job of breaking through some of that stuff. And I'd like to, from both of you, I'd like to kind of get the perspective of what it's like breaking through that.
Dave, do you want to go first?
Sure. Looking back, I started working in law enforcement what was back in 1990. So I'm still actively assisting with them, but I think back in maybe the early mid 90s working Vice, it was a different world. Human trafficking was not even a conversation that was being discussed, which looking back now, we know we likely encountered a lot of victims. We just didn't recognize it. And it wasn't being discussed. It wasn't being trained on. So I have seen a huge shift now in awareness of law enforcement and the posture of law enforcement. The fact that when they're doing stings where they're trying to identify potential victims, that they are actively reaching out to organization, like for Zoe, for example, they'll reach out to Zoe, let us know when operations are happening, because their ultimate objective is not just the arrest. They don't want to just make an arrest. They want to get help for potential victims. So they'll even label the operations human trafficking rescue operations. So what's their main intent? At every roll call, you're going to be hearing them say, our goal today is to rescue human trafficking victims. And so it's a radical shift, and that just takes time. And they also understand that law enforcement, they can't continue on after the arrest and processing, or they can't continue on after a victim identifies. They need partner agencies to help take care of these victims. And so what I have seen is a real victim-centered approach that has been growing over the last 5 and 10 years in a significant way.
Brad?
Yeah, it's something we're constantly working on. And again, education has everything to do with that. Dave and I got involved in law enforcement about the same time. And to date us, we both have gray hair here. So to date us, there was no computers when we started law enforcement. So we were banging away on typewriters and there was no, again, there was no term for human trafficking at that point. At that time, it was a prostitute on a corner with a pimp. That's what we thought it was. And I even remember, this sounds very archaic, in the academy, that prostitution was labeled a victimless crime. So, man, have we come a long way in that? So again, it's a lot of terminology. It's a lot of education with both sides, both education on law enforcement side of, hey, this is what, let's look through the lens of the victim of human trafficking here. This is what it looks like. And mostly we're dealing with that big question of why don't they walk away? Why don't they just leave? And teaching about the trauma bond and everything that holds that victim in place, because it doesn't make sense. It really, even with those of us that have experience in this, it's frustrating sometimes when the victim doesn't walk away, but we now understand why they don't. So we have to teach that to law enforcement as well. But breaking down the silos is, it does go both ways sometimes, because again, as the position that Dave and I are in, we're kind of, in between law enforcement and the restorative services. So it's education on both sides. And probably one of the biggest challenges that we're finding is we're moving this bus down the road and bringing all these other agencies, law enforcement, social services, nonprofits on board. Everyone has a little bit of a different agenda, and everyone certainly has an opinion. So our job here is just to keep everybody moving down the road, and with that victim-centered approach. One of the things I've learned very early on, especially in Thailand, watching our founder, Mike Hart, he has such a teaching concept of, especially being a missionary in a developing nation, you find so many closed doors and so many stoplights. So his teaching is, okay, well, that answer's no, but what can we do? We can always do something. So we just keep kind of keeping this whole force moving down the road with all these different objectives, all these different opinions, and just concentrating. It really helps just to concentrate on those that need help.
That's one of the reasons I'm doing the monthly podcasts on this, because I want to keep bringing the fact that these are victims. You'd mentioned that we used to think of it just as prostitution or a victimless crime. I honestly believe back when we were working this in law enforcement, they weren't in there any more willingly than the people that you all are dealing with now. Do you want to go into, Brad, you brought up trauma bond, and you want to, both of you, kind of give possibly some examples of how the traffickers use that, and how it has actually manifested with a couple of cases that you've worked with.
Dave, do you want to go first?
Yeah, trauma bonding. It's also called Stockholm syndrome. I think people have, it's been recognized, especially in domestic violence situations, where people say, well, why doesn't the abused spouse leave? And there's a trauma bond that happens. And traffickers are true predators. They understand that, and there's different type of methods that they use. Some traffickers use force, threats, violence. Others use manipulation, coercion, and it could start with, I guess one of the best examples. This is like the old school show Brady Bunch. For those people watching, they may have to YouTube that. They may not even know what it is. But I remember hearing this from the mouth of a trafficker who would describe how they would actually choose a victim if they went in the Brady household, and they'd say, which of the girls would the trafficker go after? Who would he target? And he said he would target Jan Brady, the middle child. Why? Because the oldest child gets all this attention. And that's why they do these episodes of Marsha, Marsha, Marsha. And there's this jealousy that would go in. So if he would walk in, he would completely ignore Marsha. And what he would do is begin to shower compliments, give Jan all the attention. When she speaks, he has his full attention. And he goes, by the time I leave that house, she'll be following me. He doesn't care about her. He's manipulating her. He'll say things to her that she's been hoping somebody would be saying to her. And he's doing it with intent to create an emotional bond. That's how a trauma bond begins. He'll create an emotional bond, and then she'll end up doing things she never wanted to do, or even face violence. And even she'll be in a conflicted state, which is, it can happen to any victim. You can get into a conflicted state, even though bad things are happening. You're not sure what's going on, but you're also getting this affirmation or getting things you could never get before. And it creates this bond where sometimes the victim will actually defend the perpetrator. That's what a trauma bond can look like. That's why sometimes we would just describe the chains can be invisible. They may not be locked down, but they're so emotionally chained, or manipulated, or some are just honestly just under threat. They're under a chain of fear, that they can't get out. But that's an example of what a trauma bond can look like. And I can say this too, seeing it with victims, even in the early stages. I remember talking to a teen. She wasn't even 18 yet. She's sitting in a hotel. There was a sting that we had done. And so law enforcement picked her up, and she was defending the trafficker, the guy who had sent her there to have sex with a man in a hotel who's paying for that. She's not going to keep any of that money. It all filters back to him. But she goes, he is such an incredible guy. You don't even understand. He's such a nice guy. Well, how'd you meet him? Well, I met him online. He was a huge influencer. He had a huge following. And all he did is he scanned that feed, and then he would target girls that would look most vulnerable. She would post online how she and her mom were at odds. And so he reaches out, direct messages her, telling her how beautiful she is, how nice she looks. Well, the fact that you have an influencer sending a private message, that alone was shocking. And then in conversation, he goes, I'm willing to even send a private car to pick you up and take you to a party, in an exclusive party in LA. And so, of course, she said yes. Well, at that party, she's doing things she never dreamed she'd be doing, but she's getting affirmation and attention that she's always hoped that she could be getting, but from someone who is targeting her to use and abuse her. And even sitting there describing how his intention is not her best, it's just hard for them to even recognize in the early stages of trafficking that they're being manipulated and they're being used.
Yeah.
Yeah, these guys are, I say guys because generally the traffickers are statistically more so men than women. But so we use these guys as usually refer to men. These guys are master manipulators, and they know how to use vulnerability. They can operate without vulnerability. So now the problem we have now, more now than ever, if we go back to our early stages of law enforcement, we didn't have technology like we have today. So they don't have to actually spend time at a school. They don't have to spend time at a playground, at a mall, although they kind of still do at times. But now they can just go online through social media and just cast an extremely wide net. And what they're doing there is just seeing who's vulnerable. So a trafficker doesn't look at just one person and say, I want to traffic that person. Trafficker will cast a wide net with just a bunch of inquiries, direct messages, and just some conversation back and forth. And they know from the answers that they start receiving whether that person is going to be susceptible to this. And also, again, they are master manipulators. The interesting part about with Zoe doing global work of, we're talking to our colleagues all over, and they do the same thing in Thailand as they do here in America. It might look a little different, might be different shaded a little differently, but again, they're operating on vulnerability. One of the things that we teach in our human trafficking 101 and our prevention, and really, we're using a megaphone to reach to share this message, and that is that an empowered child or empowered person is difficult to traffic. So many people want to do something to end child trafficking, and it's hard unless you're actually in the front lines, in the trenches, to really get your hands around, the problem. So we often encourage whoever we're speaking to, schools, community groups, churches, county organizations, of who in your community, who in your sphere of influence, who do you have that looks vulnerable? Make relationship with those people, attack vulnerability in those areas, and you're also helping to defeat human trafficking.
That wide net that you were talking about, it's amazing now. With the technology that's available, some 12-year-old girl or even 12-year-old boy creates a new social media account, and immediately they're getting friend requests from these predators. I mean, they've got the bots out there that will find them, and they're just casting a net to just say, "Hey, can you friend me?" And then they'll start conversations, and they've basically got a list now of things that they'll say to somebody, and if they respond this way, they send something else. The traffickers have got this down to a science anymore.
Yeah, just, within the past couple of years, we've had a case both in Lancaster and Berks County where once the trafficker reached out, it was only 3 weeks. And it was weird. In both cases, those cases were pretty close together, but both girls that were over the age of 18, but just barely. Once the trafficker reached out on social media, from the first DM until the time they were being trafficked was 3 weeks in both cases. So it happened that quickly. He found two, it was different cases, but in both cases, the trafficker found two very vulnerable girls, contacted them on social media, and within 3 weeks, they were providing services.
The sting operations you guys have, Dave, you've recently had something happen that you've been involved with that made some headlines. Do you want to discuss a little bit about the success you had out there with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in California, they did a statewide effort and they called it Reclaim and Rebuild, the idea of like reclaiming your streets, rebuilding. Um, Especially it's and the effort is against human trafficking. So it's a statewide effort to combat human trafficking. So agencies and counties throughout the state will target this in a week-long effort and try and get rescues and they'll make arrests. So within a 1 week period in California, 177 victims were rescued. 11 of those were children, and 7 of those kids were found right here in LA City. So, and there was 547 arrests that were made during that week. So it was a series of various operations from hotel to massage parlors to John Sting's buyers going after the buyers, operations going after the traffickers. And in a week long effort, you can see large numbers. But I think what's happening, it's not just because that week was uncharacteristically high in this activity. It's that week had an uncharacteristic amount of attention and law enforcement effort to be able to combat it. So you can see if you focus on that problem, you really can identify a lot of victims and make a lot of arrests. You can make a dent in this. That's why we say you can't, like, we need law enforcement in this fight. And thank God that they're out there making great effort, especially in the city of LA. Um, about half of those arrests were right here in LA City, which is great. And as I mentioned, they got a lot of kids rescued off the streets here. One was, there's an 18-year-old. This is just a teen. This 18-year-old had autism, was spending time online. She was groomed by a trafficker, and then she gets lured by this trafficker, then goes missing, and now she's gone for days. Um, but and then by a miracle, law enforcement was able to locate her, rescue her, all within that week period. She was one of the victims that was rescued. There was a young lady I was speaking to who was identified at one of these hotel stings, and she had a tragic story. She's an adult now; she's over 18, but she was kidnapped once at 14, again at 16, by a trafficker, brought into this life, and now she feels stuck in this cycle. And one of the things she said, she goes, every time I'm with a man, I feel like another piece of me dies. And you can see the pain in her eyes. Like there's a lot of broken people who feel stuck in this. And there are certain locations, there's one location in the city that gets so bad that if you drive these streets, at 1 o'clock in the morning, there's a neighborhood where it's known as it's the Figueroa corridor, But at 1 in the morning, you could be driving and it's like gridlock traffic. You're like, what is going on? People aren't going to work. There's not an accident up ahead. These are buyers lining the streets to buy a human being. That's what's going on these streets. And this is where we got kids as young as 15 years old that week off those streets. So law enforcement puts a lot of time and attention to combat that and go after it. But that's human trafficking can look like a lot of different things. It could be a nice hotel. It could just be street level, like we talked about.
And even we all know, even within homes, when you were talking about or describing that lining the streets, the pimps are viewing each of these victims as a product. And as a result, when, the difference between trafficking in people and trafficking in narcotics is they got to keep replenishing the supply. With your rescue facility, you've located that outside of the city, and you've taken some measures to what we call in the military defense in depth. You want to describe what the need is for doing something like that? And to be honest, Brad knows I'm interested in trying to find a way to bring that to Pennsylvania as well. But do you want to describe the reason for the extraordinary measures?
Yeah. So what we have, in Los Angeles, some of these kids need safe housing. They need beds. They don't have a safe family. There's no place for them to go. So we need to provide a short-term care until identified foster care, especially trained foster care families can take these kids in. And so what we have, we've got a 50-acre campus, but we have it well outside the city proper. It's farther out into LA County, into more of a remote area. And there's security measures. It's fully gated, all 50 acres. It's a fully gated and fenced property. It looks beautiful. It doesn't look like a compound. It would look more like a nice estate, because this is a home these kids are going to live in. So it goes through a lot of effort. It's going to have a beautiful recreation facility. It's got a sports center, and it's a beautiful, comfortable environment. One, it helps them just to de-escalate and get into new space and be out in the open. But secondly, it's if these kids are high risk because traffickers, that's their commodity. So you mentioned that like a gun, you could sell once, a drug you're going to sell once, but a person, well, you could sell over and over again. Even if you get pulled over, you're much lower risk. It doesn't look, you commonly see two people sitting in a car. They could say that's my uncle. They could see it's my boyfriend. They could say whatever they want, but it's harder to identify if there's an actual crime because the commodity is a person that's being sold over and over again. Sometimes these traffickers want to go where these kids are at and try to pick them up again. So that's why we have security measures at our facility and we keep it out of the city proper. It's just another barrier. Whereas if you're right in the city, you're just much closer to where a lot of the activity is taking place. So that's one of the reasons we chose to put it where we put it.
Thanks. David, do we have any, are we having any success in finding a location here in Pennsylvania yet, or?
Yeah, well, I think we're still in the beginning stages of, we're always looking for what are the long-term solutions to this.
Yes.
And that's just kind of where our whole executive team and our founders are, what other long-term solutions. So we have a lot of work to do before we get to that. Right now, we're working again with Berks and Lancaster County, and one thing I love about Zoe is we're not just located here. Like we have the expertise and the knowledge of what's happening globally. So our team's coming together and just looking at this whole process of what would it look like and how would that type of facility what would that look like here in Pennsylvania? So, and we have a lot of work to do with that as well. Like right now, even though we've been operating for a couple of years, I feel right now we just finally got our legs up underneath us with the relationship building, and now we have the ability to start looking at this is what we're doing now for prevention, and we spend a ton of time doing some preventative measures. But in that preventative measures and with our mentorships, we're learning, okay, what are the entry points? What does it look like from here on out? What is their transitional thing? So we're still just kind of gathering a whole ton of research of what that looks like. We would like to monitor or duplicate something of what we've done in both Thailand and Los Angeles here. But one thing we've also learned is this is a marathon and not a sprint. So we're just taking our time, getting as much information and finding out what we can do. Zoe's very good at thinking outside the box and creating something new that's innovative and cutting edge. And that's what we're looking at here in Pennsylvania.
Well, the key is dealing with at Shared Hope's Just Conference here a year and a half ago. There are folks in Arizona and Georgia, who work out in California and here in Pennsylvania, where it's the things that I'm seeing where there's actually some real success is where you've got a lot of faith-based organizations that are working with law enforcement and social services. The social services in those areas have really started to realize that the breaking down those barriers, allowing faith-based organizations, because quite honestly, that's where the people find the why they want to get, the victims are finding out why they want to be survivors. And when you were, both of you, when you were building the organizations, what were some of the significant barriers? What are some of the things that other counties or local organizations can do to if there are individuals that are interested in taking this on in their area, what are some of the things what would you give as advice to them? I guess would be the best way to put it. Brad, do you want to start?
Yeah, wow, that's a big question. Yeah, I think for the benefit that I had to start the work here on the East Coast, I had the credibility of Zoe International that was already well established in other places. So that brings along, like, we're trusted, we're extremely open and transparent with our finances. So it's just a very clean organization saying, hey, we just want to help. Is there any gaps we could fill? And again, what helped us is we've been doing this for 20 years. So I'm seeking all the expertise of my colleagues and my bosses of, hey, how would we do this? But I think first it's just identifying where the gaps are. If someone wants to get involved in this, especially with the sort of the quasi-rural model that we're starting here in Berks and Lancaster County, we identified where are the gaps. And then this is 100% everything to do with relationships. You have to have relationships. So start making relationships with the kind of the movers and the shakers already in your area. Who's doing what? Don't try and duplicate what's already being done, but see if there's any gaps that can fill. And again, I think what the working model that we have here is really, it's hard to do this without partnering with law enforcement and partnering with the government organizations. And government wants to do something about this. They just don't always have the budget or the resources or the manpower. And that's where a trusted nonprofit can come in and kind of get to work and get their hands dirty and just get a seat at the table and start making a difference.
Dave?
Yeah, that's good. Every location is going to have its unique, there's unique laws that are going to be specific on how this work needs to be done, especially if you're going to open up a home. So you have to understand your county, your laws. You've got to do some research. It's expensive to do that, to create a facility. And usually you're going to have to go through an accreditation process, licensing process. So there's going to be some funding that's going to be needed. So you have to be willing to endure and fight for it. And because at the end of the day, you're just fighting to have an opportunity to care for these kids. That's what you're getting a chance for. That's what we always tell our staff for. There's very high standards of what you got to do, which is a great thing because you want the best for these kids. So one, you just have to go in with your eyes open, what you're stepping into, and learn from those who are in the field. As Brad's saying, start by just getting on, if there's local task forces gathering or community task forces that are meeting, you're going to find out who's doing what's effective, what's not effective, and what's missing. And the reality is it's a huge problem. So it's not like any one organization is going to be able to tackle this whole piece. That
No.
it's going to take all of us together. Um, it's going to take like today we have the power of a senator's office that's involved in it. You've got law enforcement on the ground fighting for it. You've got different organizations that are trying to combat it. You've got churches taking in these victims, loving on them, bringing these families in. They can do things we could never do. So because people they heal in communities. So it's going to take the entire community to come together. So if you're going to go in this work, you can't go in as a solo agent thinking that you're going to be the one that solves it. You've got to be able to play well in the sandbox, honor and appreciate others that are in the field, and
Yes.
find ways to help out and make a difference together.
You touched on a couple things there. First of all, that is huge. The willingness to work with others and the ability to work with others.
Mhm.
Not everybody's going to be able to pull that off. They don't have the personality for it. But if you're passionate about it, and the thing that really strikes me, and Joseph Stalin had said once that a million deaths or a single death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic.
Mm.
And there are so many people that I deal with that they talk about the children, the children, the children. I want to talk about the child, because when you're talking about that individual, now it's personal, and the personal relationships, the personal contacts, understand the tragedy and the living hell that these people are going through. There's a sheriff west of Dallas. I can't remember his name, but he was talking about several of the cases, and he brought up the fact that as he's working with the social services, he's getting he has contact with these young women and men who are in their mid-20s, but their emotional development was arrested at pretty much the date that the trafficking started, 11, 12, 13 years old. But once they get out, or once they have an understanding of the why they want to be a survivor again, with the faith-based organizations that are giving them the ability. He says it takes a couple of years, but the social services people that they're working with, that restoration comes. It's not immediate. It's something that takes years, but the emotional developmental stages that the psychologists and others that are working with these survivors, they say it does come rather rapidly once it's there. But I think it's a combination of understanding, you're the survivor becomes aware of the fact that all the things that were taken away from them, and there's probably a hunger there to try and get all of that back in a period of time, and or as quickly as possible. What are some things that as I'm hoping law enforcement, other my fellow legislators and people who are looking to get involved, what are some of the things that you would suggest people to reach out to, things to look for, education, educate yourself. What are some of the things that you would recommend if somebody's looking to get involved in something like this?
Brad, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, I think we're really in the tech age that we are. A lot of people can just do a ton of education online, and there's a lot of good stuff out there. Polaris Project, NCMEC, and even within your own state, you can find a lot of online training that will educate you about human trafficking. I would suspect, and I think I'm pretty accurate with this, that most people, if they know nothing about human trafficking, once they dive into it and dive into the education and find out exactly what it is, they're going to have a different understanding of, okay, it looks like this instead of this. So if the first education is the big thing of where we need to start with, if someone wants to just get involved in this. And then, it's where do your passions lie? Not everybody can be on the front line. And I know that this is human trafficking. We're glad that it's a buzzword and people want to get involved and all of that, but not everyone is designed to be on the front lines. Not everyone is designed to do this work. So identify within that of, okay, what ability do I have? But then how often, what could I do with this? So maybe it's partnering with a nonprofit that's already doing this work, or starting some education within your organization, within your church, within your school. There's even a process we have within Zoe is to take, if a college student has a passion about this, they can take the processes that we've already designed and teach this on your college campus. So education and awareness is very is a big part of this. Yeah, and then after the education is just, again, what abilities and passions do you have to put towards the human trafficking effort? And again, I think one thing that, we do a ton of prevention here, and we do both in LA as well. But just last year, Zoe in 2 counties did 55 human trafficking presentations in 2024. And, one thing that we see every time is people want to know, what do I look out for? And that's a hard question, because many times the signs and symptoms of human trafficking look like a lot of other challenging parts of other people's lives that may not be human trafficking. A father and his 13-year-old girl not getting along one day, sort of from a viewpoint looking at, looks like it could be, So all of that to say, there are signs, and they need to be aware of these signs. But again, I always go back to attack vulnerability. Traffickers cannot operate without vulnerability. So what are you doing within your own sphere of influence to attack vulnerability? That's one place that everybody can start.
Absolutely. David?
Yeah, just going off of what Brad's saying, this is happening every day. We're sitting here online talking right now. Predators are online targeting, so it is they're relentless, and they're always active. And this is, for every adult that's watching this, they can make a difference, because uh, one thing I say is a connected child is a protected child. If they're emotionally connected, if they've got family that's around them that are connecting, that's a harder target for a predator to go after. They're looking for disconnected. They're looking for kids who are alone, disconnected, rootless in many ways. That's why kids in foster care systems are often really vulnerable, because especially if they're moving around, they're not as connected, emotionally connected. Just because you're in a home or you have people around you doesn't mean you're emotionally connected or people are aware. So I just tell, any adult that I would see is just, you got to be aware. You got to know where your kids are at and who they're talking to online. And most importantly, be involved in their lives, because they'll tend to be more open with you. So that is the greatest strength. And unfortunately, we've got a lot of kids within our cities, our counties, or even rural areas, that may be vulnerable because their family is been broken apart, or they've pulled away, or especially if a kid rebels young and early, something's going on, that kid's really vulnerable. So if you're a church, I mean, you go after them. You look for it. If it's someone in your neighborhood, you go after it. If you're an uncle and you know that you could be a voice in their life, then you be that voice in their life. But nothing can match a parent too. So I'd say parents, it's like, don't be afraid to put boundaries, especially, the biggest thing is when you give a child internet access, it's like you've just opened your front door. You'd never let a predator in your front door, but if you give open internet access and there's no boundary on that with a young child, you have to understand that white van that you warned them about may just really be pulling up online, and you just got to be aware of that. So I always emphasize awareness and just be there for those kids, get involved
Yeah.
in their lives.
You know, you said a connected child is or a protected child is a connected child. That
Yeah.
There are people who will say, well, they are connected on the internet. You know, they're connected. You know, they've got their online connections. That's not the connections you're talking about, and I think everybody here is aware of that. But I know there would be some that would actually use that as a means of defending, you know, not being a proper parent or not being connected with the child on a personal level. We've got some serious work that needs to be done here.
And this is piggybacking off of what Dave said about what can we do and what can people do. And one of the things that Zoe has concentrated on well is protecting kids online. And so we've taken, and this is really kind of one of my passions, because as a detective, I was an ICAC officer, and Dave is an ICAC officer as well. So ICAC is a Federal Task Force Internet Crimes Against Children. So this is kind of our passion and our heartbeat, and that so much of this recruiting is happening online. What can parents do? So Zoe has put together a process of how to protect kids online. And again, that's one of those megaphones. We will teach that if we have just an audience of 3 or 4 people, just to make sure that our kids are protected online. And you know, most of it happens with the communication between the parents and the child. You know, we're now in the age where it's not. We're also making parents aware. It's not what's the conversation going to look like with your child, not if they find pornography online, but when they find pornography online. That's the age that we're living in. So again, a large part of what Zoe's been doing too is finding ways to make sure that parents, teachers, those trusted adults in life know how to protect the kids that are in their life, how to protect them online.
Yeah, the Pornhub pulling out of Texas. I mean, that was a headline, and it was meant to be a joke, but it is critical, the fact that by Texas passing that law where they actually had to verify the age of the person that was going on there. Those children's brains are not developed to where they can deal with that. Now, there are still plenty of places out there where these kids are going to come across it, whether intentionally or not. So that is a discussion that I think would take an hour in itself, you know, about the impact of porn and how it is actually feeding this, is getting people involved, and instead of wanting it just online, then they start looking for actual people to live out those fantasies. And that's unfortunately a part of the grooming process that the 3 of us know is going on. You know, I appreciate having you guys on here and discussing. We're very selective about who we partner with, because and we've researched the reputations. And when Brad, when you were talking about reaching out to other organizations, I think you folks, and because this is this can go national, or people anywhere can watch this. You folks and Shared Hope, I think, are the 2 organizations that on a national level, you have partnerships with all sorts of folks around the country, and you know the folks who are sincere and have the reputations and the wherewithal to actually do things right. So how do people who are interested in becoming involved in this fight, how do they reach out to you?
Yeah, best thing they can even just do is go to gozoe.org, and there's information online, and they can even drop an email on there too if they have a direct question or want to reach out in a specific way. We'd love to connect with them.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I truly appreciate the time we've had today. And what I absolutely love the work that you're doing. I'm grateful for it. And again, one child at a time. What's that mission statement? Reaching every person, rescuing every child. And that's what you guys are involved with every day, and it does get personal. So thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Well, thank you too. Thank you for being a champion too. You're honestly a true voice, um, and a champion for the cause. And for those of us on the front lines in this work, having your voice behind it, it is such a fuel, and an encouragement that people in positions of power are doing what they can to protect the least of these in society. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I concur as well. Senator Dush, thank you for your voice. Thank you for, you've always been there for Zoe whenever we reached out for a question or a concern or, so we love the partnership and thanks for what you're doing.
Oh, thanks. I will make one distinction. I don't have power. I have authority. I operate under authority, and that's one of the differences I see with folks that I deal with. There are people who seek power, and there's people who seek to operate under authority, and I pray that I maintain that. So thank you.